Hey horror fans, me and Rachel are back for another week and another review of The Haunting of Hill House. So we're going to be talking about episode 6, which is called Two Storms. And this one focuses on a family reunion, basically. And I think not just for the characters, but it's their first time in the same room for years. But it's also because it's really the first time we've seen the father. And did he know more about what was happening? Joel, what did you think of this episode?
I was not prepared for this episode. I actually wrote that when I first started watching it. I was like, I am not prepared to watch this episode because this episode is so emotional. So, as you said, this is the viewing of Nell's body. So all the siblings come together to do the viewing of Nell's body before the funeral, and as you said, it's the first time we see all of them together. I think since Nell's wedding was probably actually even not even Nell's wedding because Luke wasn't there. So this really is, I think, the first time we've seen all the siblings together with the dad since we saw them in Hill House. And then the juxtaposition is between, I don't think it's the last night that we're seeing of Hill House. I think it's just a night that there happened to be a big storm. And so we're just seeing a juxtaposition between this storm and that storm. Now, before we get into the emotional side of things, because we will talk about everything that unfolds in this episode, I just want to talk about the technical aspects of this episode, because this episode is filmed in 4 long takes. So each take, I think, is roughly between 10 and 15 minutes long. I think the longest take is 14 minutes. And this is like a slow pan of the camera, moving between the characters, moving between the settings. And it is done in such a fantastic way. So it feels, first of all, you have the actors who obviously do not get any cuts. So they have to just keep going almost like they're performing a stage play. So they have to maintain the emotion of the scene, as well as, of course, moving within the scene, because there are a couple of scenes where the older actors get switched out with the younger actors. And so you have to think about all of the stuff behind the camera that you're not seeing, of switching out all of the actors to get those shots right. But then, of course, you have the camera work, which tracks them through the funeral home, through the house. When we get the flashback to the storm at the house, we actually get some really cool camera work with, obviously, the set of Hill House, the camera moving through the set to show all the different things that are happening. And I just think on a technical level, this episode is probably the most adventurous one they've done so far. And I think that Flanagan's direction and the way they use the camera and the way they use the actors and place the actors just is so effective. And it kind of is relentless, you know, it's not giving you a break from these emotions. It almost kind of reminds me of The Body from Buffy, and the way it doesn't use music, which forces you to focus on the camera, on the characters, the way that this one doesn't cut away from the camera. It forces you to really engage in what is going on screen and the emotions that these characters are feeling. So I just think on a technical level, this episode is brilliant. What did you think of the long takes and the direction and the camera work used in this episode?
I agree, they were really effective. It obviously gave it a different feel to the other episodes, which was intentional. I liked how sort of like compressed to largely the one location, even when you switch to the past and at Hill House, that obviously is in one location as well. And so it does feel very condensed like that, which I think definitely adds to the drama. So like you said, there's no real let up. It's continuous sort of like long takes and sort of very just building tension all the time in the characters. And it's sort of, it achieved that very organic, realistic emotions and the reactions. And because, just stuff with them sitting there. And I think it's almost like 1 minute it can flick between being quite lighthearted and remembering something nice about Nell. But then, you're only just like a split second away from it going sort of wrong and there being like a dark sort of like secret or just something that's going to tick someone off. And it does feel very realistic, the family dynamic in like those scenes, because it does feel like the sort of hardships which do get brought up especially at this sort of occasion, because obviously someone's death and dealing with that brings out, bad sides to you in a way. But no, I thought it was really well filmed, and again, an episode where I think where it needed to be, it was scary, although it probably didn't rely on like those sorts of moments as much, because it did feel more like it was focusing in on this domestic drama in a way. And I think it's a good comparison. It did feel very much like a stage play at times, the way they used the location and just the characters and how intimate it was,
Yeah, definitely. And we have a lot of emotion in this episode, obviously, because they're viewing their sister's body. They've got questions about her death and obviously her suicide, and the fact that it happened at the house has brought up questions about their mother. But I do like the way the episode shows how they swing from being really good to each other to being really awful to each other. You kind of see the best and the worst. So when the episode starts, they're all trying to kind of keep it together in their own way. So Shirley is obsessively fixing Nell's body and fixing things. Her husband is keeps trying to like offer food and everything. Theo has a little snarky comment. She's like, this is his defense mechanism. He turns into a waiter. And Theo, of course, is drinking a lot. And we know there's a little bit more going on with her, which we will find out about later. But I love that when, like, for example, when Steve first comes in, like, we know that there's a lot of bad blood between Shirley and Steve. We know that they have issues, but they hug and they ask each other how they're doing. And for this small moment in their grief, they're able to kind of put their differences aside and actually be there for each other. And I like that the episode shows that, grief, as bad as it is, can kind of bring people back together. I wanted to give a little mention to a particular part that I like that just gets me so much. When Luke has come in and they're going to go view Nell's body, and Steve is trying to comfort him, and you kind of see them revert back to their older brother, younger brother dynamic that we see when they're younger. And Steve becomes so focused on helping Luke and getting Luke down to the coffin to see the body that he becomes so selfless that it's like he forgets that that he's going to have a reaction too. And you see him be really strong for Luke and be really, we're going to do this, I'm going to be here for you. But then the second he sees Nell's body, the second Steve sees Nell's body, he just freaks out and he kind of backs away, and he's like, yep, that's Nell, and she's dead, Jesus Christ. And I just love seeing how selfless he is, and then the way that he just breaks, because he's just so focused on getting Luke down to see the body that he hasn't prepared himself. And then you see Shirley come up and comfort him and, say it's a shit time and that she changed all the light bulbs in the house for absolutely no reason because she just needed something to do. So I just really like how we see these siblings kind of, for a brief moment, just be really good to each other and actually comfort each other and try to get through this grief of seeing their sister. And of course, as the episode progresses, the not so good sides come out. But at the beginning, like, I even noticed, I really love that the siblings are overcoming their differences, in their grief, and just kind of, just being decent and being good to one another. I really enjoyed seeing that. And then, of course, when Hugh comes in, when the dad comes in and sees them, I think it's so beautiful and tragic that he sees them as kids. He walks in and he looks at them and they've all reverted to their children selves. And I think it really shows how, for Hugh, they are almost frozen in time for him, because we know that he lost custody of them. So he never really saw them grow up. He didn't get to really raise, especially like Luke and Nell, who was so young when they would take, like, Steve was, 14, 15. So he was already a teenager, but like Luke and Nell were only 5 or 6. So I think it's very significant that Hugh still sees them as children and still sees them the way they were when they were at Hill House. Again, kind of showing how this house has frozen this family and frozen them in that time. So I really liked all that emotional stuff. What did you think?
Yeah, a parent, your children are always your sort of babies in a way. Yeah. I think it partly goes back to that. But yeah, definitely. So I like the way that was shot when he first walked in. It captured all of them sort of surrounding him. It's almost like, in a way, this is a confrontation. We haven't seen this man for a long time, and we've got some questions. We want some answers, and obviously for some of them it might not have been intended like that, but I think it's purposely like shooting it like that. There's something, very confrontational about the way they're like captured surrounding him. And Timothy Hutton, I think, does a really good job in the episode, because he really conveys this sense of just being overwhelmed by everything, and obviously just knowing that his children have so many questions. And I think he, more than anyone else, is like just afraid to not stoke the fire in a way, not piss anybody off. Whereas the others, maybe they're a bit more open and comfortable with doing that because they've grown up and they sort of know each other probably a little bit better than they know him. So I thought his performance was really effective, how he sort of underplayed everything, and you just really felt for him, I think, a lot of the time. But it's a lot of good drama, because again, like we've been saying in other episodes, you see the good and the bad from all the characters, really. Because I did think it was really impressive the way Steve comforted Luke. I thought he was very strong for him in that scene. But then flipping that across, I sort of didn't like so much the way he went after the father. I thought that was a bit harsh. So we definitely saw the good and the bad sides of all the characters, really.
Yeah, of course, definitely. And you see, I think Steve's anger at his father is very interesting, that he has so much anger. And I think in particular for Steve, it's very hard because he doesn't believe, the haunting, and he doesn't believe it's supernatural. So for him, it's like, it's really frustrating for him to not have answers as to what happened that night. And I think also him being the oldest and maybe having the most memories of their mother and having the most memories of the house. And we will see this in further episodes, but there are incidents that Steve is recalling where his mother was behaving erratically, and he has no explanation for these. And we also hear him bring up the topic of mental illness as well. And obviously, once we get answers as to what's going on, we know that that's, not what's going on here. But in Steve's eyes, it's a mental illness that hasn't been addressed, that hasn't been talked about, that affected his mother and has now taken his younger sister. And if you put aside the supernatural things and just look at it from Steve's point of view, who doesn't believe in the supernatural, this would be really frustrating to believe that your mother had a mental illness, that your sister has a mental illness, and that no one in your family is addressing that. Like, he's probably thinking if she'd gotten help, or if we'd gotten Nell help, or if mother had seen someone. But the fact that their father refuses to talk about it and refuses to give him any answers, I do think he is far too harsh, and I do think that he picks the wrong time to have this confrontation. I think even Shirley steps in and says, you need to remember where we are. Your sister's body is right there. Like, you need to remember what we're here for. But then we see, of course, Shirley start to go off at Steve as well. So they all kind of get caught up in the emotions that are going. We see Theo start to yell. And I think it's just a very realistic portrayal of what grief does to you. Grief can bring out so many different sides to people, and losing a loved one is such a visceral, horrible experience that you just can't predict how your behavior is going to affect you, what's going to happen, what's going to come out in the heat of the moment. And I think that this episode shows that really well, that build-up of emotions that happens when you're grieving a family member. So like I said, it's not just Steve, you also see Shirley kind of come in. So they're all running on high emotions.
I think, one thing we see again from Shirley is a bit how old-fashioned she can be, because I thought, like, the comment about when she was trying to shame Theo for, like, drinking and being drunk, I thought that was a bit old-fashioned. It's like, come on, that's actually quite normal. Not that you should overdo it, but it's sort of understandable than someone might at this time. And obviously, it's, if you're remembering someone, it's sometimes good to relax and have a bit of a drink.
Take the edge off a bit, kind of work through the emotions.
But I also like the touch of, like, Theo sort of falling sort of against the wall, because that again, partly because she was drunk, but probably a bit of nerves as well. And again, it comes back to the whole thing of don't touch me, because when two of them tried to pick her up, that's a pretty shocking moment when she's like so forceful with them. I was trying to remember actually, isn't, because there is like one sort of kind of darkly funny line in the episode, and I think it comes from Theo. Is it one of them says something about Nell's been trying to get us together for years, but
and Theo's like, someone should have told her she didn't have to try this hard. Yeah. That one, and there's another one I like, again from Theo, where someone tells her to ease up and she's like, I'm trying to drink her back to life. Would you like me to stop? And again, it's just kind of horribly inappropriate, but it coming from a character like Theo, I think it works for her character. I actually made a note that like her harshness is very relatable. I think there are a lot of people that do cover their grief with black jokes and being harsh. I'm a little bit like that. Like I tend to I tend to take things that are like maybe not funny and joke about them, and people are like, oh, and I'm like, well, you know, it's kind of my way of coping with things. So I kind of get Theo's like why she's doing that. But I just want to talk a little bit about the flashback we get to the two storms, because again, I think that's done really well and really significantly. So we see a night where there is a really bad storm in the house, and I hate storms, so I totally agree with like the kids being scared out of their wits by this storm, and being in that particular house during that storm I think would be even more terrifying. And we see that the house is, you know, the chandelier has fallen and some windows have been blown out, and then there's a scene where Theo is holding Nell's hand and they turn around and Nell has just vanished. She's just disappeared right in front of them. And there's this very interesting juxtaposition of them trying to find her in the flashback versus the fact that she kind of has vanished in real life in the present. So it's showing that in both instances, it's like almost like foreshadowing that the house is going to eventually take her, because we know that Nellie has been haunted by the house her whole life, and that the house in particular seems to really want her. And so the fact that she vanishes kind of right in front of them is, I think, very interesting, a very interesting juxtaposition between the past and the present, and how she's vanished in front of them. Well, she's vanished from their lives in the present. And of course, we also see that the house is starting to get to Olivia. Again, we get little hints that something is happening to her, because we see her wandering around, unaware of where she is, of what she's doing. Hugh finds her at one point and she's like, oh, I'm having the strangest dream. And so obviously we see that the house is already reaching out for both her and Nell. And I thought those scenes were done really well to show the like what's actually happening in the house and how malevolent it's growing. I thought they were really well done. What did you think of the flashback in this episode?
Yeah, really good. Again, atmospheric and really well shot. And I think because of the way the direction style is in this episode, I think that means that those transitions are quite sort of smooth, where they can almost like link up the past and present. Whereas I think other episodes, maybe purposely, they feel like quite different in their style. I think because of this, they were lapping over with a lot of stuff, and it's almost like a single sort of move. A Good Mother a bit more in this, like to Nell, because I said last time then she maybe a little bit came off as a bit sort of heelish, a little bit, but could have been reading into that. But I thought in this we did see her actively like being a good mother, and the way she was there for Nell and stuff. So that was good stuff. I think we saw a little bit more of that this time. Yeah.
And then of course you have the ending, which is just so sad, where you have Nellie's, when they finally find Nell and she appears just out of nowhere, and she's saying, I was here the whole time, I was screaming, I was crying, and none of you were looking at me. And then they have that cut to, that's right, and Luke is like, takes her by the shoulders, and he's like, well, little Luke is like, I thought the house got you, I thought the house took you, please don't ever do that again. And it's so heartbreaking, because of course it cuts to older Luke looking at her coffin, and it's just so sad that the house, again, I think this episode really shows the foreshadowing and the juxtaposition between the past and the present, and how the house was kind of always going to take Nell, like the poor girl has been haunted by her own death her whole life, and the house just making her vanish, being able to make her just disappear in front of them. And then there's that shot of her as her voiceover comes over saying, I was alone, no one could hear me, I was right there and none of you saw me. And then you see Nell's ghost standing by the coffin, and it's such a horrifying thought that after you die, you're stuck in this place where no one you love can see you. Like, Flanagan has used this in other media. Bly Manor, for example, has a whole thing about what happens when you're in the afterlife, and this notion of being alone and being without your family is so horrifying. And it's so horrifying for people who might have a fear of death or might have questions about what happens after you die. So this thought that Nell is there the whole time, that she can see them and she can hear them, but they can't see or hear her, is really very sad. And I actually have to mention, there is a scene, it's when the dad first comes in and he's going down to view Nell's body, and they're all kind of standing behind him, and you have this shot of all 5 of them, and there is actually a shot and Nell is actually in the background, her ghost is in the background there as they're all viewing her body. And I remember the first time I watched this episode, it was done so subtly that I didn't see her for like a full 2 minutes. I was so concentrated on the family that I didn't actually notice her ghost standing in the background. And when I finally saw it, it scared the crap out of me. I was just like, how long has she been there? And when you go back and watch the scene, she's actually there the whole time. So again, it's that kind of idea that these ghosts are always surrounding us and we just don't know, we can't see them. And I think this episode really plays into that, of that veil that exists, at least in this universe, between the living and the dead. And we're going to get more, as the series goes on, we will see more and more about that veil and if people can reach through it. And it's just such a sad notion of being alone in death. And Nell in particular, because she has been so alone for this series. You know, we've seen her, we talked about in the last episode how cut off she is from her family, how isolated she is. And it's so sad that that's continued into her death, that even in death, she's still completely alone. I don't know. I was really hit with that tragedy.
Commenting on, I think, how ghosts are like sort of overlooked a bit, like she is. In some ways, it's like not believing in ghosts or underestimating the possibility of the supernatural, because that's obviously a big thing with Steve. And
yes,
it's so funny him talking about mental health and that, because obviously in some ways, like, mental health in itself is something which is like overlooked nowadays. You know, it's not taken nearly as seriously as it should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, from his point of view, it's almost like he's going to the other extreme. It's almost like anytime anyone has any sort of like mental breakdown or something, or any suggestion that something's up in their life, it's like he's jumping to mental health straight away. And probably in reality, it's a mix of the two. Probably there is elements of mental health, because what they've been through, you're going to have, you know, mental trauma. But that's obviously not, you know, it's still, the stuff they're seeing is still supernatural. But yeah, but no, I thought that was part of what they were going for, maybe, is just saying, it's almost like, maybe also a comment on just now being like, well, along with Luke, like the youngest, and sometimes how younger siblings feel like they get forgotten about or overlooked. So I thought they were drawing that parallel with her and the ghosts. So it's almost like ghosts get overlooked and they're not taken seriously, at least by someone like Steve. And you have the same thing with maybe now as a character. So
that's cool. That's a very, I never thought of it that way, but that's actually that's a very cool point, a very interesting point of the younger siblings getting overlooked, because I'm an elder sibling, so I can't usually see it from a younger sibling's perspective. So I really like that. That's a really interesting aspect that I think we'll have to keep in mind as we continue with the series. But I really like that point. That's a good one. Overall, I think this I think is my favorite episode so far. It's such a strong. I just love the emotion in this episode. I love seeing all the characters together. I think we see some of the best and some of the worst of the characters in this episode. And like I said, I think on a technical level, this episode is brilliant. Like I think they've said that if you look hard enough, you can find mistakes, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to go like nitpicking and looking, because that just ruins the. I mean, obviously, undertaking that sort of filming, and they were time restricted as well, you will end up with some mistakes slipping through the cracks. But I don't need to go looking for those. I think what they managed to achieve was spectacular. I thought those long takes were great. It really builds the emotion. The camera work is fantastic, and I liked the juxtaposition between the past and then losing Nell in the past and then losing her in the present. And I think this episode just works so well and just has that beautiful emotional ending that just gets to you. Like, this series is so equally terrifying and heartbreaking. Like, it's amazing how they managed to balance the horror with the drama. And I think this episode's a great example of that, because you have the storm versus the emotional storm that's kind of going on with the siblings. So for me, this is the best episode so far. What about you? I think
it's up there. I won't quite go that far. Maybe the Theo one is still my favourite, but it's up there. I definitely liked how it was directed and how it gave it a different feel, because those long shots are so effective. I sort of like the one where Sherry, obviously she walks over to Nell's body, and she's the one who sees that it's got like the two buttons on, and I like how the shot is actually taken from the guys, standing back, and Sherry's off in the distance, and it says, "What's this?" sort of thing, and there's another similar like use of that when Steve at one point sees a ghost, doesn't he? When he's like looking.
Yes, he sees Olivia's ghost. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. So those long shots are really effective for that sort of thing, I think, where you're seeing the character just looking across the room. And I think by using it in this episode, it's a good way to build suspense, like the way you've got them tracking down the halls in Hill House, for example. But it just gives you a sense of the room as well, like the scale of the room, I think. So it's definitely up there. I think because it is a different kind of episode, it's maybe a little hard to compare to the others, and obviously I did find it emotionally draining, which I think is maybe good and bad, but it definitely achieves what it set out to do, and the ending again was very impressive, so it's definitely going to be up there for sort of best episode. So
it's like we said before, the bar is so high that it's not so much that you have bad episodes. You just have episodes that are like fantastic, and then you have episodes that are just great. But like, I don't think there's like a bad episode, or at least there hasn't been so far, because the standard of this show is just so high and just so good that even when, like you're saying, like, this is maybe not the best episode, but it's like, if the best episode is here, this episode is like here. It's like not that much of a difference.
I think maybe, although there is obviously meaty stuff in this episode, I think maybe other episodes have had a bit more meaty stuff in terms of what they've done with the characters. So that may be why I just have a slight preference for, like, the Theo episode and the Luke episode, I would say. And the last one we did with Nell was very good. So I maybe have a preference for those three maybe so far, but this is a different sort of episode, and I think it obviously achieves what it needs to, and it's obviously nice to have a change in sort of style, and obviously such a big episode in a way with them coming together and meeting the father again. If you've been watching along, then comment in the comment section below, like and subscribe. As always, you can share us out on social media. We will continue with, of course, Hill House until we finish it, and just to give you a bit of a hint of what we might be doing next TV-wise, we've talked about doing Stranger Things as our next TV show, because, of course, there's a new season of that coming next year, and it's one I've only, briefly sort of covered on the channel. I've certainly not done all of it, so it's a good chance for us to do up to now and get ready for the next season, which comes out next year. So that's exciting stuff. So once we've finished Hill House, the plan is to do Stranger Things. And speaking of horror TV, another current horror show we're doing is the Chucky series, so you can catch up with our thoughts on that on the channel. So yeah, look out for more horror movie and more horror TV. Check out Rachel's channel. I'll put the link in the description. And we'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.
Bye.